Fire Mage is one of the funnest mage specs there is, and this is a beginner guide that is going to help you achieve up to Keystone Master or ahead of the curve in Heroic without any information overload. And I'm hoping this is going to set you off to be a pro. If you are looking at doing Keystones over 20 or Mythic raiding, this is going to give you a fantastic foundation in the spec. First of all, let's look at the stat priority for a Fire Mage. I always like to look at it as a pyramid style. So at the bottom, this is the largest, the most you're going to want, which is haste. Second up, we've got crit. Thirdly, it's verse. And last but least, yes, is mastery. Now, don't worry too much about this if you are a beginner. If it is an eye level increase, which is generally going to mean there's more intellect on the piece of gear you're upgrading, just go for that and don't worry too much. But if you do have two options that are, the same eye level, this is the priority you're going to want to take. Next up is talents. This is the beginner build I recommend here. I'm not going to be going through every single talent, but I do recommend when you are a lot more familiar with the build itself that you do just maybe go through and see how it all kind of works in together. But as a beginner, don't worry. I've put an import string down below in my description, and you can import this straight into your talent tree. When we go through the rotation, I will be mentioning a few of the core talents that really do impact the rotation. But apart from that, don't worry. Now, before we actually get into the rotation itself, I now want to show you some of our core cooldowns and utilities that we have at our disposal. So first up at the top here is Ice Cold. This is going to give you a damage reduction, and it's also going to heal you. It's a very good defensive ability. Then we also have Combustion. This is your most important offensive cooldown. This gives you humongous combat increases. It's going to increase your critical hit chance by 100%. It's also going to increase your mastery by 75% of that. And it's also going to slowly increase the crit chance of your allies around you, etc. It is just fantastic. And this is actually going to play a big part in our rotation. We have greater invisibility, which makes you invisible, and you lose all threat as if you've gone invisible, and you take 60% less damage while it's active. Down below here, we've got Time Warp, which is our Bloodlust or Heroism. And of course, that is going to increase the haste by 30% for all party members. And lastly, we've got Mirror Image, which summons mirror images of you to attack your target. Moving on to the actual utilities, there are more utilities in this, but to not give you an overload of all the different million spells we have and button bloat we have in World of Warcraft, this is the 4 that I would say are, in my opinion, the most important. We have Polymorph, which of course you're probably aware of, which incapacitates the target and turns them into a sheep. And then we have Arcane Intellect, which is going to buff your party for 10% intellect, which is very, very useful. We have Counterspell. This is your kick or interrupt. And then we have Blink, which is very good. You're going to blink forward and teleport in front of you by a distance. And this is really good for getting in or out of sticky situations. So now we're actually going to go through the fun part, which is, of course, the rotation. Now, it's very cooldown dependent, and we're going to be almost stacking buffs to get the most damage out of this. This is a beginner rotation. Fire Mage can get exceptionally complex if you start to look further into it. And as I said, this is the most beginner rotation that I was able to put together so that it's not overwhelming for you if you're new to the spec. So first things first is we are going to be using Fire Blast pretty much on cooldown. Now, when I use this, you're going to see that my Pyroblast here, which normally has a very long cast time, is now instant. When I cast this, we then get this buff here, and this is called Sun King's Blessing. And when we have 8 of these, so to reiterate, when we cast an instant Pyroblast, it's going to give us an extra stack of Sun King's Blessing. When you've used 8 of these, or you've stacked it to 8, it is then going to make your next hard cast Pyroblast, so like this, where it's not an instant cast, it's going to make that super duper, basically, and it's also going to give you 6 seconds of combustion, and that's when you have 8 stacks of Sun King's Blessing. You can see I used it there. We now have 4 stacks. And what this thing is called that's giving us the procs is hot streaks. So when we use this, when we use Fire Blast, you can see here I've got an heating up. And then, boom, it is now a hot streak, which gives us the instant Pyroblast. And then again, heating up goes into that. When we have run out of Fire Blasts, you can use Phoenix Flames to get more of it. And then when you've got nothing else to do, we're going to use our Fireball in the interim. And when your target goes under 30% health, you're going to swap out the Fireball for Scorch, okay? And that is because of the talents we have. Now I've got 8 stacks. You can see here, Sun King's Blessing has turned into this buff here. And when I use my Pyroblast Hardcast, you can see there, we've now got some seconds of combustion. And that is pretty much how the main rotation works. So one last thing that we're going to do is when we have no Fire Blasts remaining, we're also going to use Shifting Power. Okay, so I'm going to sum the entire rotation up now, just to give you a full understanding. So we're going to be using our Fire Blast to get stacks of Sun King's Blessing by using instant cast Pyroblasts. And when we're out of those, we're going to use Phoenix Flames and Shifting Power. Okay, our filler spell is going to be Fireball, which we're going to then swap to Scorch when the enemy is at 30% health or under. And overall, we're trying to get our Sun King's Blessing with instant casts of Pyroblast up to a stack of 8, so that we can then do a hard cast of Pyroblast to actually get some seconds of combustion, which is, of course, our main cooldown that we are going to be using. One last thing I am going to mention is to do with our Time Warp. Now, as we probably all know, when you use Time Warp to increase the haste for you and your party by 30%, this is going to give you a 10-minute cooldown called Temporal Displacement. Now, as a mage, we actually have use of our Time Warp still. It is on a 5-minute cooldown for us. However, the remaining 5-minute cooldown, when you're on Temporal Displacement, we actually have a passive ability here called Temporal Warp. And this means that whenever we have Temporal Displacement or other similar effects, like if you have a cooldown from Bloodlust or Heroism, we can actually still use our Time Warp to grant ourselves 30% haste for 40 seconds. In other words, when you and your party are on a cooldown from Bloodlust or Time Warp, you yourself can still use your Time Warp, and you get this buff here, which is Temporal Warp, and it's basically your own mini, well, not mini, it is actually a full Bloodlust or Time Warp, and you can get this for yourself. Now, that is the entire rotation for a Fire Mage. I hope this guide made it easy to understand. It's not the simplest or most straightforward of specs to understand, so I hope I've done it justice. If you are looking to get the weak aura that I have here in the middle of my screen, I will also put that down below in the description. It's one of Luxvoss's weak auras. They do ones for every single class, and they are incredibly useful because it tracks all of your buffs, etc.